screen cap of it.
I like to have the screen cap because it helps you remember where you're
Well, just keep it by pages.
I'll make pictures. The format for the core perspectives. So it has to be your citation, then like either a picture from the movie you talked about or the quote that you're talking about, and then your main essay.
Okay.
That's if you're ready. I'll text you.
Thank you. My turn. I talked to the girl from Mexico yesterday. She's in Mexico, and I'm so excited. Like, it looks so much better than my expectations. And she was telling us all about it, and she said, like, we're gonna have so much fun. And they were doing like tequila shots before work. So I'm not too worried. I called Emma immediately. It was midnight. So I'm excited. Wow,
Can we maybe lift the
yeah.
Sheets.
I can.
Hi, Michael. Let me know if Lupita joins. Okay, so obviously we have Michael Nava with us. All right, and you can say hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Michael, it's a very small class, as you can see. So I'm just going to let them ask questions because you have questions, right?
Can we open the discussion first?
Oh, yeah.
So I can look at the
Yes, I can reopen the discussion.
Thank you. I typed them. I did my question.
We said it Google Doc first.
I didn't put them in a Google Doc. Yeah.
I do it for every
It'd be easier if I just had to like turn them in on a Google.
I know.
And Michael, we have also online with you is Lupita, whom you've met before in the class from Mexico.
Hi, Michael. Hi.
Sorry, Michael, just give me 1 second here. Who's missing today?
No.
It's open, they'll have to refresh. All righty. So, Michael, we spent the whole semester reading detective fiction from Spain and Latin America, and we're concluding with you. And the novel they read was Lay Your Sleeping Head, which was the revision of your first, right? Henry Rios novel. And I'm gonna let the students ask you questions, and whoever wants to go first. Michael, can you hear us okay? Because we don't hear you.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself.
All right, good.
Now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Do you hear us all right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, yeah, as you can see, a very small class. So it is your opportunity to have a conversation with someone you've read this semester. Don't embarrass me.
I guess I can start.
You have to be loud enough so he can hear you in the box.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I had a question with your intention when you write. Do you write for a particularly gay audience, or do you prefer, or not necessarily prefer, but do you welcome like audiences of any sexual orientation to kind of like develop a deeper understanding for your work?
Well, that's an interesting question. So let me turn it back a little on you. And I'm not being impolite. I just want to open, because I get asked this question a lot. So, would you ask a white writer, do you write for a white audience, or do you want your books to be read by non-white readers? Or would one ask a Black writer, do you write only for a Black audience, or do you want your books to be read by readers of other races? It's not about the writer's intention, it's about the writer's human experience.
Yeah.
My human experience is that I am a gay Mexican-American male. And so I could have done what some queer writers have done, and written about straight people, and not written about my own experience to make myself more marketable. But I don't. That's the choice they make. For me, it would have been dishonest. So I write about the experiences, my own human experience, and it's not about my intention as much as it is about whether readers have the intellectual and moral bandwidth to go outside their comfort zone and to read books by writers with whom they might think they have nothing in common. So it's not a question for me, it's a question for readers. Are you as readers willing to go beyond your tribal identifications and read books by writers whose experiences seem alien to you? And I have no control over that. And the answer generally is no, most readers aren't.
So Juliana, as a reader, how did you feel reading the book?
I mean, I'm not a person of like Spanish descent, but I do identify as bisexual, so I can understand like the struggle of like forming identity. So I thought that was interesting to read. And I know you asked, like, would you ask a Black author like the same question? And I think like yesterday, I actually met with like a poet through Canisius, and that was a question, and he kind of explained how his intended audience is people of color within his community. So I was just like wondering if like you had the same perspective as he did when we met yesterday. Sorry if that wasn't a question.
No, it wasn't offensive. It's an interesting question, and I'm just I don't write for an audience. I don't have an ideal reader in mind. I write what I write, and I put it out in the world. Really, I don't really think about. I mean, I know realistically that mostly my readers are other queer people and mostly male, but not exclusively. I have quite a following among straight women for some reason.
Thank you.
I can ask the next question. Why did you decide to rewrite the book 30 years after initially publishing the first Henry Rios novel?
So the books, I got the rights back to the books in 2015 when the reprint license expired with, I forget who had it, some big publisher. And I decided that I didn't want other people to control my book. So I I declined to renew the license and decided to publish them myself. So actually, I then had to read the books, which I hadn't read. I hadn't read the books in 15 years, and some, longer than that. And as I was reading the first book, two or three things struck out. One is that I'm a much better writer now than I was when I was in my 20s, which is when I wrote that book. I'm not only a much better writer, but I have much wider and deeper life experience. The second thing was, when I wrote that book, I didn't know I was writing a mystery series because I didn't set out to be a mystery writer. And so it wasn't, there were things in the later books that I might have foreshadowed in the first book had I known I was about to embark on a series. The third thing is that when A Little Death was published, I intentionally left out much descriptions of sexual activity between between Rios and the other characters, because when that book was published back in the 80s, even two gay men kissing in a book would be enough to get the book condemned as pornography. Some reviewers would just say, oh, this is pornographic, homosexual pornography. So I wanted to try to avoid that label. So, but when I went back and wrote it, the whole thing about noir is classic noir is almost always motivated by sexual tension between the detective and the person who comes in seeking the detective's help. And in classic noir, that's always a guy. The detective is always a guy. And the client is always like some bombshell blonde or someone. And, they have this sexual chemistry, but it can't be explicit because these books are published in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So that was true. So I used that trope, but I just decided I wanted to make explicit in the revision what was implied in the original, which is that the reason Rios takes on the case of this junkie, this ex-junkie prostitute, ex-junkie sex worker, is because, there's intense sexual chemistry. So I wrote more explicitly about their sexual connection. And also because, sex is as revealing who you have sex with, how you have sex, what you're thinking about when you have sex, what you're not thinking about when you have sex is just as revealing of your character as, other choices you make. And especially in a book about two gay men in the 80s or with the late 70s, that was important to understand how they related, how they had sex, what they thought about, what they did, who did what to whom. That was all very important to understand their individual characters and also the nature of their relationship. So that's why we wrote it.
Are you going to rewrite all of them or just the first couple?
No, I rewrote the first one, and then I basically let the original second book go out of print, Golden Boy, because I've written two new books which chronologically follow Lay Your Sleeping Head and incorporate some elements from Golden Boy, but not the plot. So when I reread the books, I realized there were some things I'd missed, some major events that I had missed in the original series, because again, I was writing them in real time. And I wanted to go back and fill in those chronological and thematic holes. So that's why I wrote Carved in Bone and Lies with Men, which are now the second and third books of the series, even though I just wrote them in the last 5 years. The rest are fine. The rest stand on their own.
So a little historical revision.
No, with so much revision is just, you know, filling in. I mean, one of the things I missed when I first wrote the books was the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic in the early 80s. Because the first book was published, I finished the first book I started in 1978. I finished it in 1983. It was published in 1986. And then the next book I wrote in 1987. It was published in 1988. The AIDS epidemic had started between 81 and 84. That was the onset. And I didn't write about that period at all because, you know, of how I just explained the timing of how the books were written and published. And since AIDS plays such an important part in the later books, I really felt I needed to go back and, you know, talk about that. So that's what Carved in Bone was about.
I'll go. I have a question. Did like any other authors or writing or other novels help influence like you as an author to write this book? Other than like
So I didn't actually, I mean, I started writing when I was very young. I was, you know, a young teenager and really thought of myself as someone that was an aspiration from when I was very young. But I was more interested in writing poetry. So throughout my teens into my 20s, that's all I wrote. Read and studied poetry. I didn't read fiction. I was not interested in writing fiction. On the other hand, I like mystery novels for the same reason that people like mystery novels. When I started law school at Stanford, the poetry just dried up. And I just, you know, it just stopped coming. But the desire to write or the compulsion to write was still there. So that's when I decided, I'll try my hand at a novel. And because I didn't want to write, you know, every young writer or many young writers, their first novel is this like thinly veiled autobiographical novel about their own lives. And I didn't want to write that. I didn't think it was that interesting. So I thought, I'll write a mystery novel because then I'll have to teach myself how to develop a plot. Then I'll have to teach myself, you know, how to write characters and all of the craft of writing fiction. So that's why I chose to write a mystery. And the writers I was really influenced by the old American noir writers, especially Raymond Chandler, who are problematic on so many levels, but they did create this genre of outsider fiction. That was very appealing to me. So I was very much influenced by American noir. And then there was a writer named Joseph Hanson, who in 1973 started writing a series of mysteries with the first openly gay male protagonist. And his books were, you know, published by a big writer. He was much praised. He's a wonderful writer. So I thought, well, if he can do it, you know, then maybe I could also adapt noir to write about the experiences of being gay.
Thank you.
So you were talking about how you didn't want your first novel to be sort of autobiographical or anything, but I was wondering, how does Henry Rios reflect certain aspects of your own life and yourself? And does revisiting Henry Rios, like obviously The Little Death was written in your 20s, and then Let Your Sleeping Head was written more recently. How does like the Henry Rios in each novel differ, like in terms of like now you obviously have more writing experience and more age? But yeah, sorry, that question was a little complicated. But
no, I understand what you're saying. It's a good question. So I think obviously I borrow a lot of not obviously, since you don't actually know anything about my own life. But I mean, I borrow a lot of autobiographical details of my own life for Rios because, you know, I guess I'm just not that imaginative. So we have in common that we're gay Mexican Americans from Central Valley in California. We both go to a law school, to Stanford, and you know, we both had difficult relationships with our families over the issue of being gay, and so I think in The Little Death, I was much less conscious of how much I was borrowing from my own life. And that was one of the things I noticed when I read it, was like there were lots of things on the page that just made me cringe because I wasn't fully in control of the material. And he was much less developed as someone distinct from me than I wanted him to be. And so when I went back and rewrote it, you know, in my 50s, and having written by that point 8 other Rios books, I was able to make him a much more distinct character. The factual parallels are still there, but in terms of who he is emotionally, intellectually, morally, he's his own person at this point. And I don't think we have that much in common. He's much kinder and nicer than I am.
Thank you.
What's the weather like there?
Cold.
It's cold. We had
Sunny.
a nice weekend in the 70s, and now it's freezing cold again. There was snow yesterday.
Yeah, that's no.
So yeah.
Well, you know, it's like about 66 here. So cold here too.
That's all
warm.
relative.
I was in Palm Springs last week and it was in the mid 80s.
Oh gosh.
My partner lives in Rochester and he keeps threatening to drag me back there. You know.
I mean, it's nice in the summer.
Kinda.
Kind of.
It's humid though, really.
Yeah.
It is very, I mean, upstate New York is beautiful. It's the East Coast. So I don't know where you are from. I grew up in California and I didn't know until the first time I went to like the Berkshires and upstate New York, just how much of a desert California is.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's so densely forested in your part of the country and it's so beautiful. It really is quite dry here. And I like that part of the Northeast, but winters, his mother died in December, so we went back for the memorial in January in Rochester. It was brutal.
No, it's, yeah, I don't plan on spending my whole life here because I can't stand winter.
Palm Springs, baby.
So you said that when you were writing, you didn't have an intended audience in mind. So I was wondering how you react to people referring to you as a groundbreaking author. Like when you set out and wrote a story that is semi-based on your experience, do you feel that it's frustrating when people think of it as more like, oh, he was the first person to talk about this and this, when really it's supposed to be more of a personal story? Or was it kind of like something you take pride in to be like a trailblazer in the genre?
Well, you know, I think that those are factual statements, so I don't really take offense. It's true that there hasn't been a character like Rios before in the American mystery, and so that's just true. But am I proud of that? I'm gonna sound like a cranky old man, which is kind of what I am. But I don't read reviews, and I generally don't read what other people write about my work, unless I need a quote for the back of a book. Because I think that a book is a collaborative experience between the writer and the reader. So once I have written the book I've written, I've done my part of our job. And then you bring to it, as the reader, whatever you bring to it, which may be quite different than what I thought I was doing, but that's totally valid. So yeah, once I put the book out into the world, it's no longer mine, and whatever people respond to it, whatever their responses are completely legitimate. I just don't find them necessarily, I don't find them helpful necessarily in writing the next book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was wondering what encouraged you to pursue law, and if it is a similar motivation that encourages you to write. And then, you know, is your identity as a Chicano man, how does that influence or like inform your decisions as both an attorney and a writer?
Sure. Well, you know, like a lot of other people of color, I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and the only of my siblings. I mean, you know, two of them didn't even graduate from high school. Certainly the only one to go on to get a professional degree. And I did at a very early age, you know, I was like the public school teacher's wet dream, because I was this smart little brown boy, and I was like, I think they could project onto me the whole Horatio Alger. This kid, you know, can do something with his life. Meaning, this kid can join the upper middle class white culture, and so they encouraged me, and like I internalized those expectations for myself. I was really good at school, and my home life was difficult, and so in some ways, school was a refuge, and these teachers were more than mentors. They were, you know, they were in some cases, they gave me the nurturing, the parental nurturing I didn't get from my own parents. And I don't know, someone, I think, you know, I think someone encouraged me to think about being a lawyer when I was very young, and I think that just stuck with me. And I didn't have a burning desire to be a lawyer, but after I graduated from high school with my worthless degree in history, I had to decide what I was going to do with myself. And I didn't want to, sorry, Richard, I didn't want to teach. I don't have the patience for it. And I wasn't good in sciences, so med school was out. So I thought, I'm sort of interested in going to law school. So I applied to, but I wasn't sold on the idea. So I took whatever the law school thing is, and I applied to 3 schools. And I said, if I don't get into one of these, I'll think of something else to do. So I applied to Harvard, Stanford, and Berkeley.
That's aiming.
Huh?
That's aiming high.
Well, you know, what's the point? I wasn't sold on the idea of being a lawyer, and I thought, well, you know, if God wants me to be a lawyer, she'll get me into one of these. So Berkeley rejected me, Harvard waitlisted me, and Stanford gave me an early admit. So I went off to law school. Hated law school, almost dropped out after the first semester. It was very Don't be a lawyer if you can think of anything else to do. That's my advice to people when they ask me about law school.
We have a future law school student in our class, right?
But I got through law school and then I became a lawyer. And I discovered that being a lawyer is about 1,000,000 times more interesting than law school. And I chose public service. And I think that was partly because of my background, because I didn't, at Stanford, so during the summers, between my first and second year and my second and third year, I worked at these big law firms, which is what most of my classmates ended up doing. And the culture there, this was in the late 70s, early 80s, so straight white male. Boy, it was just really suffocating. And I knew I couldn't do it because I'd have to go back into the closet. And even then, I would always be the not white person in the room. So I became a prosecutor in Los Angeles. And then I spent most of my career working as a research attorney for the California appellate courts, ending up working at the California Supreme Court, where I wrote opinions for judges. And the more deeply I got into law, the more I saw the inequities there. California's, the legal profession and the judiciary are still overwhelmingly white and male. And so I got very involved in attempting issues of diversity and trying to diversify the profession and the judiciary, which is kind of why I didn't write for 15 years. I was very active in that effort. So I sort of discovered myself where I belonged in the law once I became a lawyer. So I'm joking about law school, but it's tough, it's tough. So it's good to know but good luck to you.
Thanks. So you wrote The Little Death around the same time that you were going through law school, right? So what was that like? I mean, it was an experience you hated going through school, but was writing kind of like something special for you that you, I don't know, was a passion in a place that you felt passionless?
Writing was my refuge from contracts and tax law. So when I was a first year student, I was dating this lawyer in San Francisco named Matt Coles. Matt Coles, who later argued the marriage case before the US Supreme Court. He's became this big queer civil rights lawyer with the ACLU. And he and I are still really good pals. He lives here in San Francisco. So we were both mystery fans. And I told him I wanted to write this mystery. And so, when we were on dates, when we were hanging out in San Francisco, we started spinning this plot about a mystery, which actually became the plot of The Little Death. And then I had this job at the Palo Alto City Jail. So the jail was located in the basement of City Hall. And my job was, I worked from midnight to 8 a.m. And when people would be arrested, they would bring them in and I would interview them to determine whether they could be released on their own recognizance, which is to say they could just be cited and released and told to return to court, or if they would have to wait until the next day for a bail hearing and the judge would set bail for them. So Palo Alto at that point is not like a hub of criminal activity. So I had lots of time to sit in the jail. And while I was sitting in the jail, I started writing this book. And that became The Little Death. That was fun for me. And when you read Lay Your Sleeping Head, so in the first scene, Rios talks about waiting in the Sally Port, the gates open, and he goes into the jail. That is the Palo Alto City Jail. I was sitting there staring at that. And so that's why that's the first scene.
Do you think if you hadn't chose law school, your writings would not be so heavily intertwined with detectives and mystery? Or do you think that the genre of noir or the novela negra would be still where you landed because poetry had dried up for you?
No, I think poetry dried up in part because I was in law school. I think if I hadn't gone to law school, I might have continued to write poetry or to try to write poetry. I know I would have written something because writing is like a compulsion, you know. So I just don't know the imponderables. I'm glad I did. I'm glad my life took the course it did. Law gave me something to write about because it involves those huge issues of social justice and crime and punishment. And the last years I was at the Supreme Court, I worked on the staff that handles death penalty appeals. And, you know, it's been a really interesting life, both as a writer and a lawyer.
Now that you've retired from the law profession, do you miss it at all?
I mean, it was really interesting, but it was a job. And I gave it 30 years of my life, and then that was enough. I don't miss it at all. Although now, you know, all of these kids I mentored are becoming judges, which is kind of interesting. One of them, he was an intern when I worked for, so I was on the staff of at the Supreme Court of a judge named Carlos Moreno, who was like only the third Latino justice ever appointed to the Supreme Court. And so we had this extern named Victor Rodriguez, who I worked with, and he just got appointed to the California Court of Appeal, which is one step below the Supreme Court. And I imagine he will end up either in the Federal Appeals Court or on the California Supreme Court someday. So that's interesting. So, you know, a number of my college friends went on to have pretty, you know, important or distinguished careers. So don't cast off your college pals. You never know you never know what they might become.
It's true. It's true.
I have a question about the content of the book. So obviously you have Lyndon University, then like the big family crisis, like rich California family that a lot of the mystery comes out of. Did you base those two things on any real people or places?
The Lyndons are the Stanfords. And Grover Lyndon is Leland Stanford. And the whole thing about, so I think that a lot of people don't realize this, but the formal name of Stanford University is the Leland Stanford Junior University. So Stanford and his wife Jane, they had one child, this boy Leland Jr. And Leland died when he was 16 years old. And Stanford University is basically a memorial to him. And the Stanford family, Leland, Jane, and little Leland, are buried on the grounds of Stanford University, which Lyndons are also. So yeah, I borrowed, and you know, Leland Stanford was a railroad baron. He was one of the people who built the Transcontinental Railroad across the US. And he became governor of California, was a senator. So yeah, I borrowed very, very heavily from the Stanford family history to create that family. The whole thing about the trust, all that's kind of made up. But the family itself is based very closely on the Stanford family. which is why I changed the name.
Quite a lawsuit.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they should be happy that someone wrote about them.
Did you grow up speaking Spanish, and why do you choose to write in English?
So this is a really good question. My grandparents were Mexican immigrants. My grandmother never learned English very well, and because I lived with them for the first 5 years of my life, Spanish was my first language. But I'm an old guy. I'm 67, so I was going to public schools in the 60s and 70s, and that was way, way before bilingual education. It was way, way before multiculturalism. And the prevailing educational theories back then were, if you're in the United States, you speak English. And if you went to school speaking Spanish or Mandarin or whatever language, my uncle, who went to school in the 40s, when he went to school, the first day of school, he showed up, he spoke only Spanish. They sent him home. They said, "Don't come back when you speak English." And that was really the way it was. So I was positively encouraged not only to speak English, but not to speak Spanish. The children of Mexican immigrants who came to my school, my middle school, speaking only Spanish, were put in the special ed class. There was an enormous stigma attached to speaking Spanish. So I was schooled out of it, and I was also taught to be ashamed of it. So, a lot of Mexican Americans of my generation had a similar experience, which is why so many of us struggle with the language.
Do you feel resentment towards that? Do you wish that the Spanish language would have been a bigger part of your life, growing up and getting older? Or, it is just the way it is, I guess.
Oh, no, totally. I don't know that I resent it, but it's a source of regret for me. I really wish I had grown, not that I'd grown up, but I really wish that bilingualism had been accepted as a positive attribute of education back then. That I could have learned English, but also retained Spanish. Because I think the ability to speak other languages is an enormous gift. And, I have tried both in high school and college. I went back and I tried to learn Spanish. And I was in Guadalajara recently. And, I can speak it well enough and understand it well enough to get by when I'm in Mexico, but I can't read or write in it with any degree of proficiency. And that's a source of great sadness to me, because it's such a beautiful and evocative language. And I have such a sentimental attachment to it because of my grandparents. So yeah, that's a continuing source of sadness to me.
I'm a future educator, and how do you feel about now, like ENL classrooms, and like they are influencing like more languages and supporting kids with other languages now? How does that make you feel?
I wish I'd had it when I was a kid. I think it's, my friend, this friend Victor Rodriguez, who's now Justice Rodriguez. So he married a woman who's Caucasian. She's lovely, Jody, and they have 2 children. Not only are their children being raised to speak English and Spanish, they're also learning Mandarin, because Mandarin is the third language in California. Actually, in San Francisco, it's Cantonese, but in the rest of in Los Angeles and the rest of California, the dialect that most Chinese and Chinese Americans speak is Mandarin, and they wanted their children to be proficient in the 3 major languages in our state. And Man, I envy those kids. You know, it has nothing to do with like, you know, it's just like the more languages you speak, the greater access you have to idea. I mean, words create reality, and the more language you speak, the more cultural realities you can enter. And this is the one great regret of my life, that I don't have a proficiency in languages, because if I did, I would learn as many as I could.
I really like the way that you view languages, and I guess, I mean, that's kind of a negative. We've been talking kind of in a negative way about you regretting or, you know, not knowing Spanish. So what are some other ways that you feel like you stay connected in your identity as a Mexican American, if you have any, or if that's an important priority to you?
Oh, well, yes, totally. I mean, first of all, there's my family. You know, I come from a working class Mexican American family, and yeah, I'm part of them. And as I said, when I was, you know, doing all this diversity stuff in the law, I was very much involved in mentoring Latino, Latinx kids, both in college and in law school. And you know, and it was helpful to them, because I am one generation or two generations removed from them, but the experiences aren't that different. You know, many of them were the first people in their families to go to college. It was kind of a culture shock to be, especially in a law school like Berkeley, you know. So they needed someone who could relate to that experience, and I could very much relate to that experience. I'm also very much a part of the Latinx writing community. You know, there are a lot of really good mystery writers who are Latino and Latina in this country. Yeah, I'm connected to them. So it's a source of pride for me. My Mexican heritage is a source of great pride for me. I regret I don't speak the language, but I thoroughly identify. That's who I am. That's my heritage, my ancestry.
Do you think that is one of the motivations for your historical novel?
Yeah, it was. So I published this novel in 2015 from the University of Wisconsin Press called City of Palaces, about the decade preceding and the early days of the 1910 Mexican Revolution, set mostly in Mexico City. And for me, it was an attempt, because my grandmother was a refugee during the Mexican Revolution. I mean, during the revolution, 1 million Mexicans crossed the border. It was the first great wave of Mexican immigration into the US. And we came as refugees, like the Syrian refugees or the Ukrainian refugees, you know, with nothing. From very traumatic circumstances. My grandparents didn't talk about it, as is often true with immigrants. They don't talk about the traumas. And so I knew very little about it. And so I set out to recover that history for myself, for other Mexican Americans in my situations, who are the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of those early immigrants, and to understand something more about, you know, what do they call it? Mi patria chica, my little country. And it was just an incredible experience. I'm actually working on the second book in that series now, which I hope to finish before I die.
How long did it take you to write the City of Palaces?
Well, I started the initial research in 1995. The book was published in 2015. So 20 years.
How different an experience was it to write a historical novel rather than the detective fiction novel?
I had to teach myself how to write all over again. The Rios novels are first person, you know, he speaks in I. The City of Palaces is third person. which is something I had never done before. So I had to teach myself how to write in third person. And the Rios novels are fairly self-contained in terms of, they're all set in Los Angeles or San Francisco. That's fairly compact in terms of chronology and location. The City of Palaces begins in the 1890s and ends in 1913 and has dozens of characters in it. And probably a half dozen of them are major characters. So it was just like, it's like going from doing miniatures to painting a mural. And it was a very different experience of writing.
Yeah, I mean, City of Palaces, which by the way is in the library, it's a much longer book, much more sprawling, epic sort of, in comparison to, say, the detective series with Henry Rios. Yeah, a good read. I encourage you to read it. It's a different experience than.
Although, the character, the main male protagonist, Miguel Sarmiento, I think is in many ways not so different from Henry Rios.
Yeah.
Sarmiento is a heterosexual guy, but I think morally they're very much the same.
Right.
When you write, do you think of the plot or the characters first, or just does it all just kind of flow?
Well, so when I'm writing the mysteries, I usually have to work out the details of the plot first. But I generally have a fair idea of who the characters are going to be and what they're going to be doing. I used to outline very heavily. Now I do a 2-page synopsis for myself to start with. Writing the historical novels, on the other hand, I have to have a pretty clear idea of the trajectory of the book and who's in it, because, again, those are much more complicated. So I need to start out with some sense of where I'm going and who the characters are. I've been working on the sequel now, off and on for the last 7 years, and I'm nowhere near finished.
So I'm actually writing my first short story for a creative writing class that I take at Canisius. And we're doing a session of peer review. So I was kind of wondering, I know you said that you don't really take into account the perception of other people. How do you stay focused on just your intention and not necessarily the reaction of others? Because I can find myself.
I think it's all about self-confidence. If you know what it is you want to say, then I mean, I think writing is about passion and about this overwhelming need to say something that kind of obsesses you. Often from traumas we've experienced, to change them. And so I think if you have that motivation, this is something I must say, that's a good place to start. And you want to stay true to that, I do think that, I mean, it's not, I have a good friend and who's a well-known mystery writer, and she and we exchange our books. So she reads my stuff and I read her stuff before it's published. And I respect her opinions and I will consider them. So it's not true that I don't take into account other people's opinions, but I'm very careful about who that is. And I'm very careful about their intentions and their motivations. And I think, I think you need to be a little guarded about your work and to know where other people are coming from. And to find someone whose judgment you trust, and who you think can read your work in a detached way. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question, back to the books originally. So obviously for the rewrite of A Little Death, you changed the title to Lay Your Sleeping Head, and for obvious reasons, because it was a rewrite and things like that. But I wanted to talk about the significance of the title change, and more specifically, what the significance of the phrase "Lay Your Sleeping Head" is to you or to the gay Chicano community overall.
So I changed the title because the revision bore almost no resemblance to the original, and I didn't want people who'd read the original going back and saying this isn't the same book, because it wasn't the same book. So I wanted to signal with the change of title that it was largely a different version of the story. Lay Your Sleeping Head is the first line of a poem by W.H. Auden, who is a queer English poet, 20th century English poet. And what that poem is about, it's about it's lay your sleeping head, my love, faithless on my human arm. Time and fevers burn away individual beauty from thoughtless children, and the grave proves the child ephemeral. It's about the transience of passion and the beauty. And it's addressed to, Auden addressed it to a male lover. And so, you know, I thought that that resonated with the relationship in the book between Henry and Hugh Paris. You know, they had this intense sexual, emotional bond that was then exploded.
When you read the story the first time, did you feel like you had to censor yourself? And I know you said that it was kind of your own personal choice to leave out a lot of those more explicit parts of the sexual relationship. When you rewrote it, was it a freeing experience to really express what you had originally wanted to say?
Yeah, it was. Because like I said, as I said earlier, you know, I wanted to make explicit what had been implicit in the book, which is the nature of the relationship. The relationship is between these two men is really driven by this intense erotic and romantic attraction. And that's crucial to understanding, you know, why Rios would change his life for this guy who's on paper is kind of a loser. So yeah, it's about the power of sexuality and erotic attraction, among other things.
Any other questions for Michael?
Who else did you read?
So we read Chronicle of a Death Foretold with Garcia Marquez. We read Who Killed Palomino Molero, Vargas Llosa. A book that I don't think is translated, La Virgen en tus ojos by Florencia Echeves, a female mystery writer from Argentina. Oh, we read Leonardo Padura, Adios Hemingway. Oh, and then Manuel Vasquez Montalban, Los Mares del Sur, The Southern Seas.
We watched a bunch of movies too.
And a couple of films. Let's see, we did the Widows of Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
An Argentine film. We did The Secret in Their Eyes, another Argentine film.
We did Armed Men.
That was Argentina too, though.
What's that?
We watched a lot. Most of the films were from Argentina.
Yeah, now that I think about that, most of the films were from Argentina.
Argentines have a sort of a booming movie industry, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. And I actually hadn't made that connection that most of those films were from Argentina. What else did we do?
Oh, Johnny 100 pesos.
Oh, Johnny 100 pesos. Oh, and Burnt Money, Plata Quemada, Burnt Money.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
So you didn't read Ignacio Taibo?
No, you know, I have taught him before, and it didn't go so great, so I didn't do him this time around.
I've tried to read his books in translation, and I don't really get it. So
Yeah, he's so that you know, he's a Mexican writer.
very prominent.
Yeah, one of the big names. He's in that movie or that documentary, the Latin noir documentary. And he did. Maybe the problem was that the novel I taught was the novel he wrote alongside Subcomandante Marcos. In what is the title in English? The Uncomfortable Dead, I think. And it was just too much. It was too difficult for the students, you know. So we didn't do him this time around, but he is in that documentary of Latin noir.
What do you hope your legacy is?
Legacy quadrant.
That's to you, Michael.
Honestly, I don't care. I'll be dead. I'll be dead. And it will be a matter of indifference to me. Sorry.
I think that question comes from one of the movies that we watched called Men with Guns, which is about a doctor who sends his students out into the Mexican countryside, and they all get assassinated throughout the course of the film. And he's in search of his legacy. And yeah.
Well, you know, my own personal legacy is not a matter of interest to me. What I hope the future brings, and Jesus Christ, it's really hard to see it at this point in our history, is a culture in which genuinely we achieve some kind of new consensus, some kind of new racial and ethnic consensus that, and this is important to say this when I would talk about diversity to the law students and give speeches and stuff. You know, it's easy for kids of color to fall into victimization mode. And I would say, tell them, you are not victims. You are the avant-garde of a new culture that's struggling to emerge. And that culture will also include white people, our allies and our friends. It's not enough. The change of attitude has to be, it can't be an us-them thing, you know. A new multicultural, multiracial, and multi-ethnic America has to work for everyone. And that's what I'd like to see on that score. And as far as the queer stuff, what I would really like to see is the day when it's no one's fucking business, you know, how you identify yourself in terms of sexual orientation or gender. States aren't passing goddamn laws to like punish children or shame people back into the closet. I mean, I'm 67, man. I have seen this over and over again. And I thought, at one point I thought, okay, we're past this, but we're not. We're heading back into the dark ages. Very discouraging. However, I will be dead soon and it'll be your problem.
Up to all y'all that are younger.
Good luck with that.
Lawyers and educators, and come on.
Yeah, no.
Any other questions for Michael? No? Well, Michael, thank you for your time today.
For asking me. It's always a pleasure. I hope I'm not too much of an old curmudgeon.
Not at all.
Oh, Lupita, I want
Although, in my defense, I was a curmudgeon when I was, 22, so that hasn't really changed. If anything, I'm nicer now than I was when I was a kid.
Lupita, I want to give you a chance online to ask any question if you have.
No, thank you. Almost they are answered. So I would ask, how would Henry Rios react to this "Don't Say Gay" law, for example, no?
How you react to what?
To this Florida law, new law, "Don't Say Gay," about kids, that
Oh, yeah.
about education that doesn't speak about gay people.
Well, he would just say, back to the trenches, back to the trenches.
Back to the dark times.
Yep. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Michael, you should be very flattered because this is Lupita's third time sitting in on a talk with you. So over the course of what, 4 years, Lupita, I think?
4 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Bundle up, you guys.
So much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And I'll shoot you a message later.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Take care. Nice to meet you all. Bye.
So Michael's on Facebook and other social media, primarily featuring his cat.
Perfect.
And he has arguments with his cat on Facebook. It's quite funny.
I'm gonna go at him.
So
Join in.
you should look him up. But yeah, it's funny because I actually have a little deaf, which I used to teach. And so now I'm teaching this other version of it. So it's just, I don't know, it's just, I think it's my favorite of his just because of that interesting sort of history. But there's 8 other novels in the series, all of which we have in the library. And then his historical novel, which is, I think, going to be 3 volumes, but only 1 volume has been published, called The City of Palaces. So, and Lupita, I did offer up your services to help Michael when he does his research in Mexico.
Eso estaría muy bien. Oye, hablando en español, ¿ningún libro suyo está publicado en español?
¿Perdón?
¿Ningún libro suyo está publicado en español?
La verdad que no sé, tendría que investigar.
No los he encontrado.
A lo mejor no, que es una lástima porque o sea, es importante en términos del género, ¿no?
Sí.
I was gonna ask if he would ever, well, I didn't know that he didn't speak Spanish, but I was gonna ask if he would, like, you know how he's rewriting the first, when he wrote the first novel, I don't know if he would rewrite any of the other novels in Spanish, just like Bride in the.
Because so he speaks some Spanish,
Right? But he can't write it, right?
But he can't write.
Yeah. So like I feel like a translation for somebody else might be a little bit like not his intention or something like that.
I mean, that's always a fraught thing, right? But he owns the rights now to his books. Because usually a writer, you write, but then the publisher owns the rights. You don't have any say in what happens to it.
Who's his publisher then? Like,
well, now he actually founded a publishing press.
Yeah.
So he publishes his own books now.
Right.
And he publishes, except the history novel that was published through University of Wisconsin, I think.
Yeah.
And he publishes other writers that he wants to, like, so he publishes some young writers, and he's been publishing reissues of the first gay detective novel, who wasn't Chicano, but the first, and so it's a small publishing house, but so now he publishes things that he wants to.
That's so great. So he kind of took back that power.
Yeah. Exactly, right? Like once he made himself, you know, and using that privilege to do what he wants to do. Right? I forgot that this is a class in Spanish. The whole hour speaking English with Michael, I kind of forgot. Bueno, Lupita, ha sido otra vez un tremendo placer tenerte en clase. Tú vienes a la clase mañana, la semana próxima, el miércoles, ¿verdad?
Sí. No, hombre, gracias a ti, gracias a todos también.
Gracias.
Y tú ves todos los libros que ella tiene atrás. Y Lupita también hija escritora.
También en proceso todavía de publicar, que sí es un problema publicar, vaya, no es tan fácil como todo el mundo piensa tampoco, pero sí, sigo intentando.
Y una cosa es escribir y otra cosa es publicar.
Sí, 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 sí.
¿Qué género escribe?
Mi tesis de maestría fue sobre migración, sobre una mujer que vino de Líbano a México y vivía cerca de donde yo estaba también, era mi amiga. Y pues sobre su cultura, que fue un choque cuando vino aquí a México, no le parecían muchas cosas, pero se tuvo que adaptar y al final ella realizó muchas escuelas. En esta sierra donde vimos la película de Men with Gun, las montañas, en esas montañas están las escuelas que hacía la persona sobre la que escribí. Y ya después se volvió ficción, o sea, ya ella vivió la guerra civil del Líbano en los años 70, entonces cuando yo pregunté sobre eso, que es parte de lo que Michael Nava decía, también tienes que hacer muchísima investigación cuando escribes sobre historia. Y en el momento en que yo le pregunté a ella sobre este tema de la guerra, ya no quiso, pues, decirme nada porque era un trauma, finalmente, ¿no? Entonces ya se volvió una novela de ficción basada en este personaje. Y todo sucede en estas montañas de Menguitgan, en la sierra de Veracruz. Y aparte, o sea, esa es la novela que salió de la tesis de la maestría. Y aparte escribo cuentos o relatos. Todos yo creo que los que escribimos o la mayoría de los que escribimos lo hacemos pensando primero en nosotros. Yo creo que esto que le preguntaron también a Michael, de que si pensabas en tu público, si piensas en quién te va a leer, yo creo que difícilmente escribes algo honesto, ¿no? O sea, es más bien lo que tú tienes que decir, lo que tú quieres decirle lo que te pica la lengua por salir, vaya, así. Entonces, hay muchas historias en la familia siempre que no necesariamente tienes que escribir la verdad de lo que pasó, es una ficción, pero basado en lo que tienes cerca, yo creo que es lo que más tienes que por decir, ¿no? Hay muchas cosas, hay muchos temas, entonces sigo intentando. Escribo, sí, todos los días como tarea, o sea, sí, propuesta de escribir cierto número de cuartillas o demás, y a ver qué pasa, ¿no? O sea, es una carrera, es un maratón, no es una carrera rápida, es un maratón. Nunca lo había hecho tampoco. Bueno, nunca había hecho formalmente. Yo soy contadora y financiera como primera profesión. Entonces, 30 años vi eso, o sea, 30 años nada que ver con literatura, más que lo que era yo apasionada por leer, que bueno, aquí están atrás y hay más. Pero esa es mi historia.
Y luego se fue a la escuela en Ibero, Puebla.
Y luego me fui a la maestría en la Ibero Puebla, ahí conocí a Richard, y ya luego me cambió toda la vida después de la maestría, porque vivía en Veracruz, ya regresé a vivir a Puebla, me divorcié después de 30 años o más de casada también, y bueno, es otra vida, ¿no? En una vida vives muchas.
En una vida vives muchas, exacto, exacto. Yeah. Y ahora que me lo dices, tengo pendiente un cuento tuyo que tengo que responder.
Sí.
Tengo que leerlo todavía. No me ha olvidado, pero está...
No te preocupes, no te preocupes. Sí, sí, sí. Y luego te mando también ya la novela como quedó, ya con correcciones y todo, porque tienes mi tesis, pero te mando la novela y si la quieres compartir, vaya.
Sí, sí,
No
sí.
hay ningún problema.
Bueno, yo conozco gente, a ver si... Sí, ella estudió en el programa de maestría de literatura aplicada, que es una combinación de creative writing y cuestiones teóricas, ¿no?
Sí, 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 sí. Es una maestría muy interesante porque te permite escribir. Casi todas solo eso, investigar sobre algún autor o sobre una corriente literaria o esto. Esta no, en esta de hecho tienes que escribir.
Sí, sí. Es un programa interesante porque es híbrido.
Es híbrido, sí, 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 sí. Y ahí estuvo Richard y todos lo amamos aquí.
Bueno, igual. Bueno, muchachillos, esta es la última clase, ¿ya?
Sí.
Que la semana que viene, pues iba a invitar a Omar Nieto, otro colega de Ibero Puebla, pero se le complicó a él mucho, porque es recién padre,
Tiene la vida complicada.
tiene un recién nacido en casa, enseña en Ibero Puebla y en la Ciudad de México y también recién publicó un libro, o sea, él tiene mil cosas. Entonces, pues decidí simplificarnos la vida y dejarles libre. Esta es la nueva novela. Todavía no me ha llegado, pero bueno.
¿No te ha llegado? ¿Y ya la pediste?
Él me dijo que me iba a mandar.
A lo mejor yo aquí te compro una también porque ha de tener la cabeza en 1000 lados, pero este es el libro.
Sí. ¿Y cuál es el título que no se ve súper bien?
El juego secreto de Moctezuma.
Juego de Secretos de Montezuma, que es una como reescritura de la historia de la conquista. ¿Ya? Y tiene otro que las mujeres matan mejor. O algo
Las
así.
mujeres matan mejor. Ese era como muy apto para la clase.
Sí, las mujeres matan mejor. Es otra novela negra. Entonces, el proyecto final, ¿sí? Y el The Four Perspectives, para mañana. Tengo algunas cositas que devolver y ¿qué más? Las evaluaciones de curso, por favor, si pueden hacerlas porque me ayudan a mejorar como profesor. Y en cuanto a la materia, ¿ya? Entonces, por favor, espero que hayan disfrutado la conversación con Michael Nava.
Sí.
Sí, ok. Y pues nada, hasta la próxima.
Bueno, ya saben que en México aquí tienen una amiga, en lo que los pueda ayudar, también encantada. Y vengan a visitarnos.
Sí, sí, sí. Bueno, Lupita, quédate un ratito si quieres.
Gracias.
Y pues ya, voy a parar la grabación.